G'day my cheeky little friends, welcome back to Sunset City. We've got a big chunky episode today. We're going to be building the most important and iconic place within our city. This is of course Sunset Beach, based on Miami Beach. And I can tell you right now, this is not going to be a walk in the park. There is so much that makes Miami Beach iconic that I also want to fit into Sunset Beach. Because of course, this is a much smaller space, so I have to be a bit clever with the way that I position things, place buildings, and scale the place. Because to be honest, there's just some things I'm just not willing to compromise on. I want a big long beach full of chunky resorts and condos, a couple of palm tree lined avenues connecting up neighborhoods and islands and mansions on islands and golf courses and why does everything have to be so big? I want to build an area that looks like this and an area that looks like this and probably this canal thing and this and this and this. And of course, this, Ocean Drive. This is the most iconic place within Miami. I want Sunset Beach to be attracting thousands of people, tourists, locals, all to the shores with hotels and resorts and the infrastructure to support all that. Roads, public transport, you name it, we gotta get it. This is gonna take a couple of weeks, but we're doing the most important part right now, planning. But then of course, Sunset City is based in 1983. So what did Miami Beach look like 40 years ago? We gotta make sure it reflects that too. So, lots of fun challenges in today's build, not to mention one of the biggest challenges, dealing with my dumb brain. Guys, I made a dumb choice, and we'll probably make a couple more. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we start building, let's address the elephant in the room. Where did everybody go? We had 50,000 people before. This is not good. Well, unfortunately, they all died. We've got a bit of a death wave going on at the moment, but don't worry, this doesn't last very long. People come back. Well, they don't come back alive, but people get born, which is great. But unfortunately, this does leave a little bit of a negative Nelly in our pockets. So we are losing money pretty fast. So building a bit of residential will help to increase that. Not to mention some hotels and other bits and pieces that are going to help us earn some money a little bit later down the track. But for now, we are going to spend some money to make some money. I'm using some dirt roads just to map out where I think some of the main roads are going to sit. These aren't going to stay. They're just a bit of a, hey, this is what was probably here before. Where did they go? Why were they going in those directions? And what were they used for? This is still a bit of a new process for me, thinking about what was here before and how did it influence the new development. I think this is really important and something a little bit tricky for this area because Miami Beach, it wasn't exactly built so much in the traditional sense. It wasn't a small town that slowly developed over time. It wasn't exactly that close to Miami that it was just another sprawling neighborhood. This was the vision of a couple of people, Carl Fisher to be one of them, who saw this place as a great area for new development for wealthy people back in the 1920s that would buy a slice of paradise, invest, develop, and eventually turn this area that was so wild, so jungly, so full of mangroves and swampland, turn it into what it is today. So with that in mind, it's actually quite different to how I've developed up a lot of other places in City Skylines. I really struggled with how I was going to actually build in this area and sort of needed to envision and needed to see the swampland, the roads, and see what it was really like. But I mean, don't you for a second think that I'm about to lay down a whole bunch of dirt roads and plant a bunch of trees and change the ground texture just so I can make this place feel more like a swampland, just so I can redevelop it, waste a whole bunch of money. I don't have money to do that. I don't have time to do that. I'm not gonna do that. Oh, that's right, I did do that. So I wasted a whole bunch of money and time, just turn this place into a little bit more of a swampy marshland. But then I also want to include some sort of estate because I found this great picture of this estate that used to sit on the beachside over here. Man, this looks so fantastic. Just so glorious and beautiful. I love this thing. I wanted to see what happened to it and then I saw a couple of pictures and oh my God. Yeah, I mean, I think this is what kind of happens around here, and I kind of wanted to show that, yeah, this was something that might have been here beforehand, and will most probably get a little bit more developed on. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in this whole area. I figured a good starting place would be where I envision Ocean Drive to sit. This will also be kind of like the center of town, the main tourist destination. However, I was just a little bit limited with space. This big old harbor was very much in the way, so I thought, I'll just take just a little slither out of it. I didn't really need this little part over here. This was mostly just filler. It wasn't really anything special, just a big car park that nobody was using and some industry that honestly was just there for filler. So I just took a little bit and it was fine. I also had a bit of extra space in the ocean I could take, trying to stay far enough away from the edge of the map. We're still plenty of space away, but just a little bit of extra space couldn't hurt. It was then time to start placing down some of the buildings. Now, we have such a great selection of Miami Beach apartments. And I say Miami Beach because these are straight from Miami Beach. And they are also within the time period of the 1980s. These are all built prior to the 1980s. These are all your Art Deco styled buildings. They are a little bit dated, not just the actual architecture, but the buildings on the workshop, they are a little bit dated. So some of the colors are a little bit off, but paired with some of the buildings that I have detailed up in Asset Editor. You've seen these ones before if you've been following the series. I've detailed these up so they fit really well within this area, and I think this whole place is starting to turn out okay. Like, just okay. Actually, no, it wasn't. This is such a nitpick, but I really wanted there to be space for a little alleyway just behind some of these buildings, which meant that I just needed to reshuffle the way that some of these roads were laid out. Yeah, a little bit of a nitpick, but definitely worth it. As I started to place down the buildings again, I was having a good think about Sunset Beach, thinking about the layout, thinking about what was here first, what was built here after the roads, what was the progression of development, what's still here that was built very early on. All these sort of things are so important when developing up a new area, at least for me, but there was something just blocking that vision. A big, chunky, blocky harbor. Yeah, this guy, he's in the way. Why is he in the way? Why can't I build around him? Well, of course, this would have been built well and truly after all the roads, most of the houses would have been established, the township, and because I'm trying to build around it, I'm trying to manipulate everything else around this shape. But this doesn't actually follow any rules of this area. This actually just follows its own rules. It's just way too big and never should have been built here in the first place. It was a very, very dumb idea. I'm deleting it. Goodbye. No, I'm just joking. I'm not gonna delete it. But I am actually going to delete it. Yes, one step forward, two steps back. That's how we do things, baby. No, I'm just joking. Now we're gonna move it. We're moving it. This is where it should have always been built. I mean, this is where they built it in Miami. If it's good enough for Miami, it's good enough for us. And I understand if it's a bit controversial, because I'm sure people are gonna probably think I could have just worked around it. I don't think I could have worked around it. I mean, where were they gonna build this thing? If you look at Miami Beach and how things are built around this area, some of these places have been here since 1915. The road layout was very well established. This didn't follow any of the road layouts. This was just plonked in the middle of nowhere, and working it into this area, it's most of the scale. The scale doesn't make sense. This works in a place that is dedicated to big infrastructure like a port and a harbor. And then the road layout as well just was never going to work because it meant that I'd have to work around it, making for some very unnatural places within an area that is meant to have a little bit more history. There's meant to be places that aren't quite interrupted with something so large like this. Not to mention, building in chunks just doesn't really work in terms of building places that feel more realistic, especially when you're building places built off pre-existing infrastructure, the environment, what was there before, places that develop over time. This is something I think fits a little bit better. I'd like to know your opinion on that, but it is what it is. It is here. It's a little bit of a mess. We need to work on it, but that's for another day. It works, it's functional. Dodge Island, though, needs a bit of a makeover. But you know what, Chief? We have fluffed around like nobody's business. We've got to get building on something. I know it didn't seem like much, but all that work just figuring out the layout of Sunset Beach and figuring out where that harbor was gonna go, that was a lot of work. And I just felt like I needed to build something. I needed to see something finished. So I decided to work on this bridge because I knew exactly what I was going to do for this one. This is of course inspired by the MacArthur Causeway. This is pretty iconic. I knew what I was gonna build here and I pretty much knew how I was gonna do it. First step was to make sure that our bridges on either side of the causeway had enough space for any boats that needed to travel underneath. One side had clearance for just private boats, nothing too big, and then the other side was just a little bit more space for ferries. But then the middle part of our highway is the interesting part because it is running across the land. This is of course a sandbar that has been just worked into this island that so many of the islands around here, around Miami, are really interestingly created from sandbars and built into the infrastructure of the city. It's really fascinating to see just how much of the city has kind of been built into the bay using these sandbars and then also just creating these artificial islands. I always find these artificial islands really strange and interesting. I actually didn't realize that Fisher Island was actually just part of Miami Beach, but they just created this channel, which makes sense when you look on Google Earth, but it's kind of crazy that they just go, you know what, let's just make an island here. That's how it happens. And the fact that all these places were actually just built so early on, you know, I kind of see these islands and think, oh, they must have built these so recently. But really, this was all built back in like the 1920s, 1930s. Kind of crazy when you think about it. So I wanted to make sure that we did include a whole bunch of these islands, but also not going overboard because, of course, scale and trying to make sure that the bay seems big and then the islands feel big as well. And also trying to include all these concepts, but then also trying to make sure that we have space between them and we're also using the space. It's kind of tricky. This causeway is particularly hard because traveling on this thing, I guess I never traveled on it, but it is this big stretch of highway that stretches all the way through the bay. It must be kind of interesting traveling along it and kind of experiencing just how big it is. But then I don't really have the same space. So then if I was to make it any longer, any larger, if I had more space between Sunset City and Sunset Beach, then that would actually make things feel a little bit too large. So scale is always a hard thing to deal with. Sunset City is actually the hardest one I've ever had to work with just because we have this bay as part of the city. So that's really hard to navigate that. But I do think the scale is fine. It just means that this causeway isn't quite as long and large as I really want it to be, but hey, that's totally fine. I had a lot of fun detailing this site with a rock wall and sand and all these little rocks and bits of detail just down below. But then what's up top? Well, it's actually a bit of a luxury drive with a hedge right in the middle of the causeway. And then this palm tree lined highway. I mean, we're gonna be doing a lot of this, but this is pretty iconic for this area. I also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just perfectly straight. So we do have some palm trees that are kind of poking through and not exactly totally lined up. And then speaking of scale, I removed all the mangroves that were sitting here before. They were a little bit too large, so I replaced them with some much smaller ones just to make the causeway look much larger and longer. It's the same concept when you shave your... never mind. I want to do something special with a bridge heading over to Sunset Beach. I saw a cool picture where you actually have the original bridge that stretched across here and then the highway that replaced it. My original plan was to build this bridge, have it so that it was stretching across right next to the highway and making it so that it was permanently open, allowing boats to go through. And maybe this was like a bit of a transitional period where the bridge was still there and eventually they'd delete it. But this was unfortunately a little bit tricky to do. Having the bridge permanently opened was proving to be very hard. Plus, when I zoomed out and had a look at what I was trying to build, it was actually just too much bridge and too much road in what is such a small space. Again, scale. So it didn't really work, so I deleted it and moved on. In real life Miami, you can kind of see where that bridge used to sit. I guess this is kind of like the old infrastructure for it. So I thought we could do something similar with the road heading in that direction. We could turn this whole area into a bit of a pier. In fact, this whole island thing, I didn't really know what I was really going to build with this. I wanted to build something that felt a little bit industrial, something that was maybe something from the past. I didn't realize until after the build, but there actually used to be a power station that used to sit here, so maybe something like that would be kind of cool. But for now, we are kind of turning it into an industrial zone, but then also sort of converted into a park. You'll get what I'm talking about very shortly. I'm actually using some industrial keys and then I'm using node controller just to squeeze in some of those nodes so that we've got some sharp edges instead of some of those round ones. And then I'm also creating that little pier there that is the old bridge heading in that direction. We'll put some guys down there very shortly doing a little bit of fishing. And then some oil tanks, but I don't really know if they're the right fit. I mean, I kind of like it because it's a nice contrast for what we're going to be building in this area down the track. You know, there's going to be some big mansions just opposite that, which I really love. I really love those big contrasts when you have industry meet wealthy residential zones and vice versa. I think it's always really interesting. You know, there's so many great contrasts in cities and it's one of those things that I really love. It's the same with these piers, it's the same with these boats right next to this industry. I think it's really interesting. I always love these sort of places. So I'm trying to think about what this could be if it's not these oil drums, these oil tankers. Let me know. We need to have something here, something industrial. Do we keep it? Do we change it? I don't know. I was feeling pretty happy with the way that this causeway turned out. Like I said, I had a pretty good vision in my mind of what it was going to look like. We still need to work on this island. What do you think we call that little island? It's gonna be residential at some point, but I don't really know what we're gonna call it or even if it's gonna be that shape, let me know. And then just finishing off the causeway with a couple of cheeky pelican boys and some fishermen doing some fishing, and then that was it. Well, at least that was it for the causeway. We need to get back to Sunset Beach. I wanted to start with the road going in. This needed to be fairly substantial. It was hard to choose what sort of a road we're gonna choose because I wanted a nice chunky median in the middle. I wanted to place a whole bunch of palm trees down the center, but Couldn't really find the one that I wanted, so I decided just to go with a classic, vanilla, stock standard, know what to expect. We'll add some palm trees a little later. Then I wanted to figure out what some of the other roads were gonna do, but I was having a bit of a hard time with, well, you know what? This guy was, again, in the way. So we had to go. Unfortunately, this will not reappear, at least not in that shape and not in that form, and definitely not in the same spot. The reason why I had to move him is because, well, two reasons. Number one, he was in the way of where some roads were gonna go, and also it was just not the right spot for a hotel and resort quite like that. And you know, present day Miami, I reckon that would probably make sense in an area like that, but 1983, I don't think that road is going to have a lot of those types of resorts and hotels. That's a pretty nice one. I don't think it's going to go there. Instead, that road going in, that's a pretty busy, not very nice road. Especially in the 80s, it's going to be more your commercial, it's going to be more your industry. There's not going to be a huge amount of demand for a resort or hotel right in that area. However, that motel we're playing with right now, yeah, that kind of fits the spot. I then want to figure out where some of these other roads are going to go. We're going to be using some of the pre-existing dirt roads that are already here, but they're not being too rigid. Some of them are pretty useful, some of them are not quite as useful anymore, but I also just love knowing that they're here and that they do influence things just ever so slightly. But then for the connection to the bridge, well, I just wanted to do something ever so small, ever so ugly, and well, I mean, we're going to get back to this. We'll add a bit more infrastructure when the demand really calls for it. But for now, it's a bit of a how's it doing type of deal. We'll get back to it when we need to. But for now, we've got some more important things to deal with. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just detailing up and adding some commercial to our main road. Again, this is not going to be anything too special, and this is the reason why I didn't really want anything nice in terms of a hotel or resort around here. So keeping it very low commercial, a tiny weeny bit amount of industry, and quite a lot of parking lots, because this is peak 80s, there are a lot of parking lots. And very interesting, I didn't realize that there was once upon a time a tram that traveled all the way out to Miami Beach, but this is definitely past that time. I believe that was taken out in the 60s, so this is like 20 years after. This is peak parking lots and cars coming over here, so I wanted to make sure it really looked like that. But then the contrast with the palm trees, the concrete surfaces, a very average commercial district. I always love contrasts like this, and it's very much association with going to the beach and being on holidays, but you've just got this pretty average commercial district to get through just before you get there. But with all the concrete now added, it was time to add a little bit of greenery. There's of course going to be a whole bunch of beaches and parks surrounding the coastline of Sunset Beach, but I did want to add one within the blocks around some of the commercial district and some of the residential as well. I thought that a good source of inspiration would be this little park here. I really like the way that the footpath within the park actually continues along the same route as the road layout. So, I don't know, kind of interesting. Makes me sort of wonder whether or not maybe the roads continued along here and then they've added in a park, or maybe it's just, I don't know, something part of city planning. But I do like taking inspiration, not just from those touristy areas, but also the places that just are in that area. You know, this park isn't exactly a touristy park or a place that you associate with Miami Beach, but it is there, and I do like that it's in Sunset Beach, and it's not exactly what it is, but it's kind of close, and that's what I want. I want kind of close. Not exact, but kind of close. I still had a couple more blocks to fill. Some of the buildings were absolutely perfect in some of those blocks. Some of them were great fits, but just felt like they needed to belong somewhere else. I actually have some really great buildings to use, but it's just a matter of searching through all the different ones that I have within my menus and trying to figure out where they are and placing them down. It's gonna be a bit of a process as we scroll through and find them over the next couple of weeks, but we'll get there. We'll start filling up these areas and try and figure out just exactly how all this is gonna take shape and what sort of things really truly belong in some of these areas. It's gonna be a bit of a process. But with those blocks now filled, it was time to get back to Sunset Drive. Yeah, I think I'm gonna call this Sunset Drive. What do you think about that? This is of course inspired by Ocean Drive. This is the most touristy area within Miami Beach, maybe even Miami. Let me know about that. I think it could be, but this is an outsider looking in really. And this is where we're gonna have all those classic, very iconic Art Deco hotels and flats and all those buildings that are just so iconic to this area. We have a real great selection to choose from. Again, it's just a matter of trying to figure out where they are because some of them are apartments, some of them are parks, and some of them are part of the hotels DLC. So it's really hard to figure out where they are within my collection and trying to just find which ones fit into the right spot and changing some of the colors and also making them feel a little bit more unique to this area because, yeah, some of them I would like to really feel very unique to Sunset City. So not just what Miami's really like, but also placing them in different areas and making them look slightly different. You know, make this thing feel a little bit more unique to us. I'd love to know, what do you guys think we can do to make this feel a little bit more unique to us? I got a couple of ideas, but I'd love to hear from you guys. But it was coming together pretty well. Definitely much better than before, that's for sure, but there was something missing. Yeah, trees. Yeah, the beach. But before we get to those things, something else was missing. The red tiles. This is one of those things that I didn't think was going to make such a big difference, but when I was building this area and looking around and thinking something was missing, something's just not right, I believe it was the red tiles, because this area, Miami Beach, has a lot of red tiles on the sidewalks pretty much everywhere. It seems to be something that is very much in place around a good portion of the city, which is pretty cool. And I do have to admit, I don't know how much of this was a thing in the 80s. I do know that Ocean Drive definitely had the tiles, but I don't know about the rest of Miami Beach. We'll have to, I don't know, I'll put it to you guys. But again, we don't have to do exactly what Miami was doing in the 80s. We can kind of steer away from it. But I do like the streets that I've chosen for Sunset Drive. These are quite different. We do have the parking that are on the beach side, and then we have these red tiles on where the commercial district is. I think that's kind of cool. It's very different, and these streets are absolutely perfect. So we're sticking with those ones, but for the rest of it, I don't really know. We might have to figure out what those streets are going to look like. But just rearranging some of the buildings, still figuring out what this place is going to look like. We're going to come back here. We're never going to finish it next episode. There's still quite a lot I want to do around here. I really want to encourage a lot of people to visit. I want to get this place absolutely right, and it's going to take a little while, so we'll come back. In fact, I need your opinions on a lot of things with Sunset Beach. In particular, this one area on the bay side along the water edge, I don't know what to put here. Because in 2023 on Google Earth, this area is very much condos, this is hotels, marinas, all that sort of stuff. But that's definitely more of a recent thing. I don't think this was the case back in the 1980s. In fact, it's really hard to figure out what this place was like back in the 1980s. This area is a bit of a dead zone. There's a few shots from the 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not really dated, but I can kind of gather a bit of an idea of when this was taken. But the 1980s, I don't really know. Do we go for fishing industry? Do we go for docks? Do we go for some commercial? Do we go for some hotels? I don't think there's any hotels around here. What do you guys reckon? Sunset Beach is very much under construction. We are in the early stages of development, figuring out what this is going to look like, figuring out the vibe, figuring out the trees, figuring out the beaches, figuring out the hotels. Next episode. There is still so much more to do down here. I need ideas. I need to stick to the 1980s. I need characters. I need a bit of storyline. How does this fit into Sunset City storyline? If you've got a burning idea, this would be a good time to get in touch. My dearest friends, thank you all so much for watching today's episode of Sunset City. Oh man, I know I say this every episode, but I really wish I built this area much earlier on. This is just starting to complete the city so much. Next episode, it's all about hotels and resorts, and yeah, things are really starting to roll. I've actually already finished that episode, and it's going to be early access for patrons in probably like 2 days. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, that's just one of the perks. And speaking of those patrons, a massive shout out to Chris, Christian Deem, Thomas Meyer, Patrick Sandrowski, Lewis Phillipson, Deco, Phil Smith, Victor Helskov, Police's Geck, Alec Nusmus, Leon Owok, Harrison Norris, Gator the God, Samuel Liu, Jake, and Michael. Cheers legends, catch you all next time. Bye!